Let the Meeple be Storytellers, ein englischer Vortrag und das Thema geht um Board Games in the Content and Language Integrated Learning. Darüber wird euch jetzt gleich der Assistant Professor in Computational Linguistics an der Aristoteles University of Thessaloniki erzählen und ich bitte zu mir auf die Bühne Athanasios Karasimos. Herzlich willkommen.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. My name is Athanasios Karasimos, and today I'm going to present you actually two presentations. The first one, how we can actually enhance the speaking of our young learners and adult learners through the board games, and the second one, how we can actually find an interesting thematic board game to build a specific kind of educational scenario that can combine content and language together. So the outline of today's presentation is going to be, at the beginning, a very short and quite boring introduction. Then I'm going to justify you why these two components in our teaching effort, which is speaking and generally CLIL, content and language integrated content and language integrated in learning, are crucial for any educational scenario. Then I'm going to present you some specific kind of criteria that we should follow when we want to introduce a board game in our classroom. And then it's time to bend the rules. So I'm going to give you specific kind of different board games that we tested from preschoolers to postgraduate students, and how we managed to bend the rules and what kind of results we received from this kind of research. So first of all, there is a theory behind it, okay? There is not just because we love this hobby, we love board games, we try to introduce in the classroom, but there is the game-based learning teaching theory that combines different kind of principles for different theories like pedagogical, language learning, and game theory. And we try to combine these kind of principles to make something interesting and not boring in our classroom. Another term that we usually use in this kind of cases is gamification. And gamification, it's not a theory. Gamification is a feature that you can take from Steam. As you can see, this is my account. Please ignore the rest of the video game information there. But okay, you take all these kind of ideas from the Steam, which achievements, the leaderboards, the badges, etc., and try to introduce it in a non-game environment. So this is a feature that can be used in research center, in education, in industry, wherever they like, so they can boost the interest and the performance of the participants or the employees or the students. And first of all, I'm going to give you some short things. Like first, the preparation is the key to success and to failure. Okay, this is obvious. But what do we mean to be prepared? Not just to find a board game that say, okay, I know this board game, I've played plenty of times this board game, and I'm ready to play in the classroom. I have to be prepared when something is not going to work and what I have to do with it. The second, we have to underline that the teacher should not forget to apply the selection criteria I'm going to present you in a couple of slides. Although there seems to be a lot, but there are not so many. Third, game education might reveals also some weaknesses. So if you're afraid to use board game or video game in a classroom, then this is going to enhance your weaknesses. It's going to be the worst case scenario. And as opposed to the video games, the teacher can manipulate either the board game time and the rules and the stress issues. So for this reason, for most of the cases, I suggest board games in a classroom to teach specific kind of things because there is plenty of interaction between the students, and of course, there is less teacher speaking. And I have to justify myself for this presentation. And I have to justify because my specialty, my main quest, is computational linguistics. However, I have another side quest which has to do about the board games. So I have 12 years experience of teaching language and education technology. I also have written 8 papers about board games, teaching and learning. We have, like 7 months ago, published an edited book about board games in the CLIL classroom with my colleague, Professor Thomai Alexiou. I have more than 10 invited speech about to present board games in education. I tested plenty of board games with preschoolers, young pupils, adults, undergraduate students, postgraduate students, and I have a quite decent collection of board games where I really like to test and bend the rules so I can use in a classroom. So let's see the objective for today. I want to, first of all, to evaluate the efficiency of using board games for the speaking enhancement, to analyze the impact of collaborate games, especially collaborate game for this purpose, to measure the progress of learning speaking skills through regular assessment to determine the effectiveness of board games in a classroom, and also to explore new strategies that we can use so we can motivate the students or the pupils with clear scenarios, and to identify and address the challenges of adopting a board game in language learning environment and suggest a way to overcome these kind of challenges. So the first of all, no, I'm going to skip the benefits because I think we have already hit a lot of things about the benefits. You know about the benefits using a board game or a video game in a classroom. And there is more than 40 years research now that can provide strong evidence for this favor. However, I want to point something, it's something quite new. And this is the things that I told you about the board games in the clean classroom. So the games are considered as a vital component in EFL, not just in EFL. EFL is in English as a foreign language, but also in German or in Greek or in French or any language, both for cases that you teach something as a foreign language or as a mother language. Also, they support many language skills and strategies and practice vocabulary and grammar. And this is really important for lots of scenarios. And playing board games teaches young and adult students how to strategize, how to consider alternatives, how to find solutions, how to solve a riddle, how to cooperate and find something that is going to make them win at the end of the day. And apart from teaching and learning practices, games also can be used as a form of alternative assessment. As you're going to see, I've built an escape room to test all my students at the end of the module Computational Linguistics. And you're going to see in a couple of slides. Now, I told you that we're going to discuss about some selection criteria. The first things are the easy cases that are related with the box. So we have to choose about the age, the duration, and the group. Now, about the group, the interesting thing is that when a box says that is for 2 to 7 players, you can use it as 2 to 7 groups. So you can give 2 pairs or 3 persons together to work as a unit in any of these board games. So you can expand the players in a board game session. And I usually say, I strongly recommend to check the Board Game Geek because the community provides plenty of information if you can play a game in other ages beyond the one that's given by the designers. And the other 2 information is level of difficulty and the rating. The first one is crucial because usually, especially in Greece, the children are not quite familiar with the board games, or they are familiar with the old school board games like Taboo, like Monopoly, like Trivial Pursuit. They do not know about the modern board games. So if something is quite difficult, it's going to be difficult to use it properly in a classroom. So we have to be very careful about the difficulty. So a heavy or a medium-heavy board game, it's not a good idea to use it in a classroom. And the last one is the rating. If something does not have a proper rating, so it is a bad board game and there is no reason to use it in a classroom. The other criteria that can be really important is the language factor. So there is always a discussion between language-dependent and language-independent games. In the language-independent games, it means that there is less text, simple rules, plenty of pictures, so this is ideal for the younger players. And this is a good idea, especially when you try to use it to teach another language, okay? Or to teach something important for the preschoolers or in the first classes of the primary school. When something we want to use for language dependency, it means that is for adults or for young people that have a proper language level that can cover the difficulties, the language difficulties during a game session. For example, you can imagine how difficult can be a Dungeons and Dragons RPG if you can split it into 25-minute sessions per class. That's okay to split this kind of 25 minutes, but the difficulty is about the vocabulary, about the description, about everything. Okay, or any of these kind of games that have plenty of storytelling, as I'm going to show you in the scenarios. The secondary selection criteria includes the following 5. First of all, the clean theme factor. When you want to teach something that is math, history, mythology, geology, geography, biology, whatever you like, as a clean factor, you have to find a specific kind of game that is going to cover this kind of goal. The second is the less amount, easier to comprehend. And the less amount has to do about the information, about the difficulty of the rules. So I think you can imagine that a 40 pages rule book, it's not an ideal case scenario for our classroom. We are going to spend the whole week just read the rule book. So you have to find something or a way to make it more easy to our subject, to our students, to our pupils. The third one is the supporting material. Hopefully, if you're going to check the fora in BBG, you're going to see several teachers like you to give a feedback about a board game that have already tested in a specific kind of scenario and provided feedback, or some activities that are related to this board game. And this is really important because for cases that there are some amateurs in this kind of effort, it is easier to find supporting material more helpful in these scenarios. And the fourth one is the authenticity. We want something new, something authentic, something interesting, not something that is quite common in their knowledge, not something that is quite common in their daily life. So usually the board games offer this kind of authenticity. And of course, we don't have to forget the fun factor. Okay, at the end of the day, they have to have fun in these board games. Otherwise, they're going to hate them. So you have to be very careful. And the last thing is about the power of the cooperative board games. It's something that I strongly recommend for most of the cases because I think that they can throw away the competition so they can be more relaxing session in the classroom. And I know how important this is because, to be honest, for our Greeks, it's something that is not part of our mentality. So when you try to present cooperative board games in Greece, they're going to tell you, I cannot understand the concept, what it means that all of us are going to win or all of us are going to lose. It's something confusing. However, when you try to explain the importance of these cooperative board games, they are really enthusiastic about use them in a classroom. And the good thing is that if we try to use, for example, for preschoolers, it's like a Montessori system. When the elder children is going to help the younger one, we can do the same one with the strong student compared to the weak student. So we make this kind of pairs so we can help them. Now, let's see about the research methodology. I give you some research questions that I try to cover in this presentation. First is, to what extent can the implementation of a storytelling game enhance students' ability to compose a creative and imaginative story following the rules of storytelling writing? The second is, to what extent can a storytelling game strengthen and enhance students' communicative competence, skills, and strategies? And also, to what extent were they engaged in speaking and reading during game session? And for the second part about CLIL, to what extent did they feel more confident about the acquired linguistic and or scientific knowledge during the CLIL-related board game sessions? And how did these board games affect the collaboration and the creativity related to language acquisition learning? Now, to understand the participants, I try this a lot with huge amount of students. So you can see that one of my favorite board games is the Unlock. I really love escape rooms. So I tested with teenagers, with undergraduate students, with postgraduate students, and also I built a similar game to Unlock for my final recap of computational linguistics. Also played Mysterium with 22 pupils and 30 postgraduate students. When you see English/GR, it means that for this kind of session, they used both of the languages for several reasons. If you see GR plus English, it means the first one, they use only Greek, so it was for teaching Greek, and the second one is for teaching English. So I also use Codenames with a huge amount of students in our Lyceum, and also with undergraduate students and postgraduate students. Once upon a time, the Color Master, plenty of time with preschoolers, with a lot of sessions, because there is a reason, as I'm going to show you. Kids Chronicles and Chronicles of Crime, Turing Machine, especially into computational linguistic sessions, and Sleeping Gods and Lads of Galzir. It is a demo result that I'm going to show you. And to collect data, I use game session recordings, or my colleagues that are running this kind of game sessions, observation sheets, reports, questionnaires, interviews, and journals. Now, one of the things that we consider is that if we're going to use technology or not. And of course, we have cases where there are board games that are without any technological support, and this is the majority. And also, we can have some board games with technology. For example, some are technologically dependent, so you can have both the physical copy and a technological tool. The second case, that it is optional. You can have a physical copy and also, if you like, a supporting technological application. And the other two cases is to be a digital version of the game or a digital simulation of the game. So I'm not going to spend too much time on this because it's, I know, common knowledge. The community of board games is still not enthusiastic about using technology. In the board games, they still prefer play any type of board game without any technological support. For some of the cases, they're quite okay if it is implemented, but usually say that it is reluctant in these kind of cases. So these are the cases of board games with a dependent technological application like AR, VR, or a tool that is in a mobile or in computer. Cases that you can have some independent application to support your board game, usually to represent the rules, or for the storytelling, because you prefer someone to be a native speaker instead of me to read the story, of course, and these kind of cases. The other one is games that you can find in Steam platform or Epic platform, okay? And the other ones that, sorry, the previous ones are cases where you're going to find board games that are a little bit different compared to the physical copies. Something has changed, but nothing strong. And in this kind of cases, in the last one is a simulation of a game. You see everything to be in a 3D version to play the digital version of a physical copy. Now, let's bend the rules. Let's see the educational scenario I told you and how we use them in our classrooms. And I start, of course, with Unlock. As I told you, it's my favorite one. I've played so many times with my students, my postgraduate students. And when I say I'm bending the rules, do you know Unlock? Most of you? Some of you? Okay, in Unlock, there is an application, and when you make a wrong combination of cards, there is a penalty button. And I usually say to my students, do not press the penalty button when it is recommended by a card. But every time that they're going to speak in Greek instead of English, I'm going to press this kind of penalty button. So this is bending the rules. You change something to make it easier. So I used more than 9 scenarios of Unlock for the first 3 boxes, and also the demos that are free. Okay, so what the results usually say that, as you can see, the silent minutes per scenario are fewer in postgraduate students. So at the beginning, they're quite silent by taking the cards, but then they try to speak to find the solution. The less confident about English students, the more silent they became. And there was plenty of time penalties, as you can see. And why this is happening? Because usually there was different kind of groups in my classroom, and they thought it's competitive to finish your scenario before the other group. So they were quite enthusiastic about playing the game, and in this kind of effort, they start to speak in Greek. So I have to press the button. Or in some of the cases, they just press the button because they need to say, oh, I can find the word in English, πάρε αυτό. Okay, so in Greek, they're pressing first the button and then speaking Greek freely. And as you can see also, the hints were quite high, especially the teenagers. Actually, they're trying to cheat. They're using one mobile in front of the group for the game, and other two usually members, they have their own mobile enabled, so they can take hints and give to the rest of the room, to the rest of the group. So that was the reason it was quite high. And of course, at the end, they feel very confident about speaking in this kind of cases. They were very engaged in this cooperative mode, even the sci students, and this is amazing because you have usually some students that do not speak at all in the classroom, and you see this kind of board game, especially with Unlock, to be very engaged in this process. The second scenario is Mysterium, and the Mysterium has the trick to do that you are going to give the weak student the ghost role, so they don't have to speak. And the second bend in this kind of rule is that they can use as many times this kind of tokens to support or disagree the decision of the other members. And the third part of this bending rules is we don't use the crow. What is a crow? It means that you cannot discard as many times the visions that the ghosts have. So we give them the opportunity to discard more times cards that are not helpful in their scenarios. And it was amazed that how it was increased their effort of speaking and discussing the decisions every time that the hour was passing. And the players needed to convince each other about the interpretation of the clues. And I didn't, to be honest, I wasn't prepared for this one. They spoke too much about the clues. They tried to interpret it with many ways. However, the good thing about that is that they use plenty of spoken data. So they speak a lot. And also, they foster open dialogue and teaching. They foster open dialogue and teamwork, teaching players how they can cooperate, so at the end make the proper choice. And also another thing that it was amazing is that at the beginning, again, the sci students were quite silent. They just make their decision without too much discussion or without participating in the discussion of the other choices. But later, when the good students are quite confident about the game, confident about the language, they start to discuss with the sci student, why did you make this kind of choice? Think better, or I disagree. So they were engaged, and it was a great thing in this kind of scenario. The third one is Codenames. And of course, in Codenames, one of the things that you can bend is the randomness. You are not going to give randomly the cards. You just put them in a proper place so you can make some choices when you're not quite sure. Also, the amazing thing about this game is that they offer you the template to create your own cards. So I use this kind of cards to teach them morphology. Morphology is a linguistic layer, has to do about the inner structure of the words. So I give them the terminology. Or for the younger student, instead of have a grid of 5 to 5 cards, so 25, we use a 4 to 4 grid. Or there is now a new version with picture, so they don't have to read, just use by the memory some words they have learned. And in these kind of cases, you are going to see that both the qualitative and the quantitative data have given a positive impact in the integration of Codenames on both vocabulary acquisition and the development of the skills like promotion, solving, creativity, cooperation, team working, and time management. And at the end, it seemed that all the teams gradually increased the number of the words they found during the game, and they alternate the winning. So have mixed winners for all the scenarios. And all the students have fun and starting that they would like to play the game again and again. It's something that they had to done before, which is positive and encouraging. So it is one of the scenarios that I strongly recommend because you build semantic networks. You find a way to make a connection between the words. And this can be a verb, a noun, an adjective, a phrase. So all of this is really important when you try to teach language. The fourth scenario is Once Upon a Time. It's quite old game, but it's amazing if you want to test someone in his speaking ability. Of course, in this kind of bending rules, we created the decks for each player. We didn't randomly given anything. So they can, all of them have some interrupt cards, some amount of adjective to describe the feelings, or some items and characters. So it was fixed decks. So they can be like a balanced deck to all of them instead of random. And in this kind of scenario, we tested for a huge amount of students. It was interesting that after the second or the third session, they asked to randomly give them the cards instead of build the deck. And for all these kind of cases, it revealed that the participating students managed to collaborate and create an imaginary story using the vocabulary they had practiced and also past tenses. And it was amazing that when the next day you ask them to create a story that was actually told in the game session, they could quite easily recall the story and, of course, use the learned vocabulary from this kind of sessions. And based on our data, more than 50 of our students didn't make any mistake in the recall of this new vocabulary. So it is quite impressive. And most of the students matched the images with the words successfully, although there was a lot of unknown vocabulary. And some of my colleagues, they tried to create some new additional cards to include them in this board game. Now, the fifth scenario is the color master. It's something that I've tested way too much time with my elder son and, of course, in the preschoolers. And one of the things that you can do with color master is, in some of the cases, you can ignore the dice, so they can go whatever they like. And the second thing, because they're getting quite frustrated when all the mixed feeling bases are revealed, so they have to start from the beginning, is you can actually ask the preschoolers to describe something that is confusing for them, a mixed feeling, something that they're not quite sure about it. Are you happy? Are you excited? Are you anxious? They're not quite sure, so this is a mixed feeling situation. So every time when a mixed feeling bottle was turned, we asked them also to describe something like that. Now, what happened in this kind of board game? We test this board game with Graphal also double sessions. And to understand what happened at the beginning, they just use Greek sentences and words. They said, for example, το τερατάκι μου είναι κόκκινο, γιατί ο μπαμπάς δεν μ' άφησε να δω τηλεόραση. Which means that my color master is red because my dad didn't allow me to watch TV. But after a couple of sessions, they start, first of all, to use English expression for the color master. They used to say, my color master is green όταν κοιμάμαι, when I sleep. And after the sixth session, they learn some expression in English so they can use them. And this is really, really important. Something similar happened because you have parallel session with Graphal double. Okay, at the beginning, they start to point the common feature between the two cards and then use the Greek word. But at the end of the sixth session, they managed at least the half of them given in English because they knew this difficult vocabulary like nobbled knees, all purple prickles, okay, from the stories of the Graphalo. And the next scenario, the next two scenarios are using AR and VR. The AR scenario with the Kids Chronicle was used with children, okay? In this kind of case, we give them as much as time as they wanted to discover something in the landscapes they have to visit or to ask again and again the characters. This is the bending part. And in the other case, in Chronicles of Crime, to be honest, I don't think we tried something that was actually bending the rules. We just give them to play the game as it is. And the good thing about both of them is that they use a dependent tool, which is augmented reality and virtual reality board game, and it seemed they didn't bother because it was something different in this board game, something artificial. And there was quite engaged in logical reasoning and critical thinking because they were using more senses in these kind of scenarios. And also, to be honest, I think that this kind of tools, the AR and the VR, appeal to the visual learners because some of them are quite hard in the process of analyze a typical scenario in a board game session. By using this kind of tools, they feel more confident. And we saw that because we compare the same players in different games. For example, we play this game also Codenames and Unlock. And the visual learners are quite engaged and appealed in this kind of process. The other scenario is the Turing Machine. Turing Machine is quite famous in computational linguistics because it was the first machine that started the whole science. So I used Turing Machine in computational linguistics and natural language processing sessions. Why this one? Because I really wanted my students to understand the reasoning, to understand the conditions. When something you give as a guess, you have to exclude some of the features to make the right decision. And this is really important when you try to teach computational linguistics and natural language process. So when I was using this kind of game, in the first scenario, I just give them in the PowerPoint this kind of picture, so they know the conditions differently. And then make their choices, and I'm going to say this is working, this is true, or this is false, and based on this interaction to make their final sequence. But in the second session, they have fully played a session by taking the card and checking everything. Now, why was this is really important? Because they try to understand the theory behind it, something that is crucial in computational linguistics, the maths. So every time you see that the percentage of the groups that managed to find the sequence in the third round, at the beginning, it was only the 35% of my students. But in the third session of the game, the 87 of my students managed to finish the game in the third round, which is really important for me. And also, because they try to interact and build hypotheses and try to make some guesses to minimize this kind of effort, it was really interesting to see them build this kind of discussion between them to make the right decision. And also, the game requires the players to carefully consider the rules and how each piece of information fits together, which builds attention to detail. This is crucial in computational linguistics. Otherwise, everything is going to fail. So it was very helpful for them to understand how this is working. And at the end, I think that this game is give them some math feedback that is not quite common in humanities, and also some algorithmic approach that they didn't thought about it. And now I'm going to give you the last two, which is Sleeping Gods and The Lands of Kalzir. I just beta test them with a small group of students because, as you know, this kind of games contain plenty of reading information and challenging vocabulary. And when I use them, the first one with my postgraduate student and the second one with primary schoolers, I was give them the opportunity to make access to a vocabulary or to internet so they can solve some of the issues. And I think that the four basic things that I can give you from this beta testing is that they were really engaged in speaking. It was amazing how they can easily recall vocabulary that was quite new because of the pictures in these games. The reading was really improved because after that I give some specific kind of question about the text and they aced it. I think they managed to score above 8%. And of course, I think that critical thinking and expression was really boosted with these two board games. And the last one, as I told you, It is a game that was built based on Space Odyssey as a recap in computational linguistics. And every time I tested this board game, I saw that the students that participated in this escape room, usually they score 40% better compared to the students at the end of the exams when they didn't participate in this escape room. Now, to conclude, first of all, the language skills has to do about the games can use to teach vocabulary, reading, speaking, and pronunciation. Also, they can boost math skills or sign concept, depends on what do you want actually to test in your classroom. History and culture, something quite common in Greece that we use in plenty of different situations, with mythology, with history, that it's modern or ancient history. And of course, I think something that we do not mention quite often is the emotional intelligence of our students, of our pupils, of our children. And to be honest, if you wanted me to ask from all of these scenarios that I've tested, which is the most successful, I'm going to tell you unlock and Codenames, because I've tested for more times, and of course they provide you with the ability to bend the rules more easily, and they can offer you more language information. The same can also happen with Once Upon a Time, because it's an amazing old game, but it's an amazing game for speaking situations. And to conclude, I think it's fascinating to see in the learning process to use board games in a classroom. And the important thing is about this that the students, the pupils, they just give an answer. They don't think about it. They don't consider if it is wrong or right. They just say, that is really important. So they are engaged. They're not sitting in a classroom. And if you ask me, I think that for most of the cases, if we want to use in a clear scenario, the Euro games and the thematic games are the ideal scenario of a category to be used. Otherwise, the family board games are a very good choice for preschoolers and young learners. That's some references from the papers, and if you like to contact me with whatever you like about these scenarios, please feel free. Thank you for your attention.
So, of course, we have some time for questions. Over there, on the left side. We need the microphone for the YouTube. So.
Thank you very much. You were testing this in classes of like 20, 30 students. How was it looking like? Like, I'm a teacher. How could I do this with a class of 30 students?
Okay, what kind of age?
Sorry?
What age of students?
12 till 18.
Okay, for the first, I think it's a good choice to take some board games that you can use multiply in the same classroom. For example, Codenames, it's a good case because they have plenty of cards, so they can split in different groups in your classroom. So you find 4 to 6 students together, you put them in a corner, and then you build the rest of your groups. Secondly, if it is possible, for example, for the unlock scenario, when we're testing, we printed different versions of the same demo, so we have different decks for each group to play together. And if you want actually to observe it more easily, you can let them record the session if you want to test how they're speaking or how they're participating or how they're using the second language, if it is a purpose. Or you have another colleague for this kind of cases, so he can come in your classroom and help you around. Usually, I strongly recommend that the rule book was given previously or presented in the previous teaching session, so they are quite familiar about it, and they do not spend too much time also to represent the rule book during the gaming sessions. And if there is the opportunity, you can find some similar games that can be used for, I don't know, for history or biology. I have a friend who using ketosis and periodic table at the same time in their classroom because he wanted to test the reaction in this basic chemistry information. So for the first step, I recommend to find a board game that can be used multiply at the same time with different groups. This can happen, as I told you, with the Codenames, with Once Upon a Time. And another thing about my choices, you can see, they're quite cheap choices. I have this kind of issue in Greece because when you tell someone that you have to buy a 60 euro or 70 euros board game for the classroom, they say, okay, I'm not going to find this kind of money. Or if you're going to suggest a game that can be with 2 or 3 copies that can cost 20 or 25 euros, that's okay. So I recommend, first of all, to find a game that can have multiple copies, not too much material that can be used in your classroom. And depends on the game, you can make pairs for your students. So if you play, for example, let's say Once Upon a Time, instead of have 4 groups of 8 people, you can have 8 groups of 4 people. Or if you want to play 7 Wonders, is one of the games I'm now to test with my colleagues. I play with 40 people together, so everyone is a pair. So we discuss together to make a decision. So since it's a 7 players max board game, I just need 2 copies in my classroom because it's 14 and 14, 28. So usually I make groups to act as a unit, as one player for this kind of cases.
Hier vorne sind noch 2.
Hi. Thank you for the talk first. You also mentioned something about confidence in language learning. It's something which I'm very interested in. I think the barrier for most people to speak a language is actually confidence, because most people know enough. The German people, shout out here, they're doing amazing, even though some of them tell me they don't speak any English.
Thank you.
Yeah, you're very welcome. So could you elaborate more on the role of confidence in language learning, and which game do you recommend for creating confidence in kids?
Okay, usually I'm going to to answer first the second question. We try to build this kind of confidence with games that have plenty of reading, or games that are going to support plenty of speaking between of them. So a game without interaction between the players, it's not recommended for this kind of cases. So how you can build confidence, or how you can measure confidence? First of all, since you are part of the classroom, you know the behavior of the student and how confident then when you ask something simple based on a text of the course book, okay? And in this kind of cases, you have to prepare them. How are you going to prepare them? For example, you teach them vocabulary. You give some of them the opportunity to read the rule book and represent the game in the classroom. So they feel confident that they acquire the knowledge of the book, of the rule book, sorry, and they also have the opportunity to explain it to the rest of the classroom. This is how they boost their confidence, and it's measurable, because if you think that after this presentation of one of your students, one of your pupils, that the rest of the classroom is ready to play the game, then you are quite sure that now he's confident not just play the game, but explain the rules, which is really crucial. The first thing that someone can test if they can identify ambiguity in rule books, or something that is not quite clear. So this is the way to build one of the things of the confident. So how you can measure it? At the end, you can give some questionnaire. They can describe their own effort. Or you can build a checklist of things that you want to observe during the game session. How often they're going to participate, how often they're going to use the new words, how often they're going to interrupt someone to complete the sentence or something like that. So depends on the research or depends on what you actually want to do, there is different kind of tools to measure this kind of confidence. But usually I say that games that are involving plenty of reading and speaking between the players are the best scenarios for this kind of cases.
My question was around how important, or do you feel like it's important that that the board game, whether it's the publishers or someone, teach the teachers the best way to teach the game or the concept? Is that something that you've noticed has been effective, or not?
Sorry, the last one I didn't hear.
Do you feel that has been effective? Have you seen that in practice, or not?
Yes. Usually when I see that there is a teacher who is quite afraid of using the board game, I think that, or not I think, from my observation, I saw that the game session didn't work properly. And of course, you can imagine, especially in my country, when the children are coming back at home and they say, today we played a game during the teaching hours. They're going to say, okay, the teacher was quite boring and they didn't want to teach you something, so they spent too much game session. I tell to my postgraduate students, please do not tell to your parents that you played today because they're going to ask the fees back from the university. But when they don't feel confident or they are quite afraid about it, they come to me and they say, okay, Thanasi, I want to use this kind of board game, or I don't have a clear idea about what kind of board game I'm going to use in my classroom. Give me an idea. And you play with him or with her. Or with them, depends on the group. And you try to explain how they can be involved. When they're not quite a player, a board game player, they have this kind of heavy part in there, and they are not quite confident. So they are quite anxious during the game sessions. They are not quite clear about to explain the rules. So there is a lot of misunderstanding or things that stop. I have to check again the rules to be sure about that. And it usually does not work. For most of the cases, I told them, please play the game at least 3 times with your family, with your friends, with your colleagues before you're going to test it in a classroom. And of course, it is okay to check the rulebook during the game session. Why this is, I'm going back to the previous question. So this is going to give them the confidence to someone of your students come to the rulebook and explain to the rest of the group what is happening, what they have to do or they didn't do properly. So it is a good opportunity. It's a not bad thing to give them access again in the rulebook during the gaming sessions.
All right, one more question over there and one over there. This one here, hinten links.
Thank you for sharing your knowledge. Your talk was amazing. I was wondering, learning a language starts from a very young age. Do you also have advice on games for kids like toddlers starting from 1.5 years?
Yes. My wife is an English teacher, so one of the things that we try to involve our sons is that they're going to play an English board game at the age of 2, for example, so they can really learn this kind of information. And since in our country it is introduced English in the kindergarten, which is really important in these preschoolers, I think you are going to find plenty of board games that can actually teach them vocabulary. So Color Master, I think it's an amazing board game so you can use for this kind of sessions. We also modified it. I forgot to tell you that. We give an extra board with some other colors that can describe other feelings. So you're going to always find games to teach either the mother language or a foreign language to your children. Since at the age of 7, they acquire the knowledge, they acquire the new language. They do not learn it, which is important, because this is how they're going to be more natural in the language process later.
And the last question, please. Here.
Thank you very much for having us. I actually have two questions, if I can sneak them in. First question is, a lot of the research seems to be based about in-person play, and I'm curious if you had any variances on online play, as some people are still in a online hybrid situation, and I've noticed that there is sort of, it's easier for people to hide online and not interact as much, and I was wondering if that had a factor. The other question I had is, do you have any recommendations for games that support emotional intelligence and negotiation? My learners are working in consultancy, they're adults, but like those are skills that they need to develop, and I'd like to use games to try and enhance that.
Okay, now for the first one about the hybrid, to be honest, during the COVID period, during the COVID quarantine, I tried to play with them, usually Unlock or the online version of Codenames. And the thing about that, you're not quite easy about collecting the data. You're not quite sure if they are communicating with Viber or with Facebook between them to tell this is the correct word to the rest of them and find it. And of course, with the Unlock, because most of the students have a small monitor, it's not easy to identify the details, because for some of the cases in Unlock, the details really matter. The only game I tried in a hybrid version that was actually working was the Turing Machine. And is the idea of the game that can be used. Now, about board games that can enhance this emotional intelligence, first of all, it depends on the age. Okay. If you ask me about preschoolers or toddlers, I think, as I told you again and again, Color Master is an amazing game about it. Now, for the other cases, please send me an email to give you different kind of games that can be used because our system is different. For example, our primary school is for 6 classes. Okay, then we have 3 classes, it's called gymnasium, and then we have other 3 classes called lyceum. And if you want to test them in different kind of ages, I can give you different options, because usually the vocabulary is more difficult. And of course, to be honest, I don't know how easy it is to find a German version or a French version or an Italian version for this kind of cases if you want to teach them in their mother language. We have this kind of issue in Greek, so usually we provide them with translation, even if the players are 15 or 16 years old.
All right. Thank you very much for sharing your knowledge and these insights.
Thank you.